You are listening to the Yavornitskiy Code podcast that was created to commemorate 170 years from the birth of Dmytro Yavornitskiy, a prominent Ukrainian historian, a chronicler of Zaporozhian Cossacks, and a keeper of the national memory. This project is implemented by local and cultural society DIYA, that means activation, with the support of the Ukrainian Cultural Foundation. Media partner is D1 TV channel. The world knows French musketeers and Japanese samurai, yet does the world know that Ukraine was famous for courageous warriors, Zaporozhian Cossacks, for several centuries? Europe was astounded by their bravery. You could read about them in chronicles. Animals were afraid of them, and allies respected them. During this episode, we will discuss how one person, historian Dmytro Yavornitskiy, brought Zaporozhian Cossacks back to history, culture, and national memory. And we are going to find out why Dmytro Yavornitskiy was called as the father of Zaporozhian Cossacks. So, who are Zaporozhian Cossacks? They were free people who started to unite in the 15th century in order to defend themselves from Tatar and Turkish forays. Tatars and Turks regularly forayed Ukrainian lands, burned down villages, and captivated Ukrainian people. Therefore, Ukrainians had to take up arms in order to survive. That was the beginning of the Zaporozhian Cossacks. In the course of time, Zaporozhian Cossacks became a separate military and political entity. They established their own republic, Zaporozhian Sich. They had their own laws in Zaporozhian Sich. The authorities were voted by ballot. There was a strict discipline and great respect of freedom. Zaporozhian Cossacks became a real legend. People all over Europe wrote about them. They were considered fearless warriors who were brave and courageous. However, dramatic changes took place in the middle of the 17th century. During the war against Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealths, Ukrainian hetman, Cossack commander-in-chief Bogdan Khmelnytsky entered into an alliance with Moscovia. He hoped for assistance on behalf of Moscow state. However, Ukraine lost its independence instead. Moscovia, which became Russian Empire later, started gradually annihilate everything that was Ukrainian. In 1775, Catherine the Great, Empress of Russia, ordered to ruin Zaporozhian Sich. Zaporozhian Cossacks were banned. Lots of Zaporozhian Cossacks suffered persecution, were sent to prisons, punished capitally, or forced to serve in the Imperial Russian Army. As of that order started the obliteration of the Ukrainian language, culture, history, and memory. Russian power even made attempts to cut out Zaporozhian Cossacks from books and textbooks and to depict them as outlaws. However, people kept memory of their act of heroism. There are a lot of songs, legends, ballads, and epic Cossack poems. Almost 100 years after the destruction of Zaporozhian Sich, Dmytro Yavornitskiy was born. It can be stated that he was the one who brought Zaporozhian Cossacks back into the historical memory. Dmytro Yavornitskiy was keen on Zaporozhian Cossacks from his early years. He mentioned that his fondness for Cossacks started after his dad read the book Taras Bulba by Mykola Gogol to him. His fondness was strengthened by songs of Kobzars, itinerant Ukrainian bards who sang to their own accompaniment. Later, when he was at university in Kharkiv, he intentionally chose his way of becoming a historian of Zaporozhian Cossacks. Thus, this subject became his life's work. However, the Russian imperial science depicted Cossacks in a bad light. any attempt to Zaporozhian Cossacks as heroes and fighters for independence was considered as challenging authorities. Dmytro Yavornitskiy faced the challenge quite soon. He was not allowed to uphold his doctoral thesis. He was withheld from teaching. Moreover, he was accused in Ukrainophilism, that means sympathy to Ukrainians, and he was even accused of separatism. Due to the political pressure, he had to move on regular basis and look for a job in different cities of Russian Empire. Nevertheless, Dmytro Yavornitskiy didn't cop out and didn't renege on his cause. Dmytro Yavornitskiy was the first person who started systematic research of the history of Zaporozhian Cossacks. He had to collect the information bit by bit. He spent long hours working in archives by candlelight, where he copied information by hand. And he traveled all over Ukraine and walked through Ukrainian steppe, grasslands, along the paths of Zaporozhian Cossacks dozens of times. It is about 1/3 of present-day Ukraine. He talked to local people, wrote down their memoirs, legends, songs, carried out archaeological excavations, collected ancient things that had to do with Zaporozhian Cossacks. The result of his tremendous work is over 200 scientific research papers that included articles, books, and monographs. He wrote about commanders of Zaporozhian Cossack camps, military leaders, heroic battles, and everyday life of Zaporozhian Cossacks. He taught history that wasn't dull, but live and fascinating. His first work, Zaporozhye in Relics of Antiques and in Folk Stories, was published in 1888. And his major work was the history of the Zaporozhian Cossacks, which was published in 3 volumes. It was the first grand and serious book on Zaporozhian Cossacks. His books were published despite the ban on studying the history of Zaporozhian Cossacks. The scientists had to address Ukrainian patrons to be able to publish his works. The books by Yavornitskiy were interesting and easy readings, so they became quite popular among Ukrainian people at large. His scientific works became a foundation for all the historians who continued to study Zaporozhian Cossacks after Dmytro Yavornitskiy. Dmytro Yavornitskiy was called the extoller of Zaporozhian Cossacks' publicity. Not only he studied the history of Zaporozhian Cossacks and was the author of books, but he had striven for Ukrainians to know about their heroic ancestors and to be proud of them. Dmytro Yavornitskiy gave hundreds of lectures in Kharkiv, Katerinoslav, Poltava, St. Petersburg, and Moscow. There was always a large audience at his lectures, including the people who had no interest in history before. Dmytro Yavornitskiy was a talented, enthusiastic storyteller whose lectures were absorbing and quite emotional. It wasn't just scientific or enlightening work. It was a real struggle. Russian Empire did everything for Ukrainians to forget about own heroes. And Dmytro Yavornitskiy asserted hard that Zaporozhian Cossacks are not just our past, they are a source of strength, dignity, and national pride. 20 years later, despite all the difficulties, Dmytro Yavornitskiy managed to uphold his doctoral thesis, in which he defended the truth of valor or heroism of Zaporozhian Cossacks, even amidst the academic environment of the Russian Empire. Later, his works became acknowledged, and he was even allowed to give lectures on the history of Zaporozhian Cossacks at universities. Yet, the crucializing is that Dmytro Yavornitskiy was able to bring Zaporozhian Cossacks back to Ukrainians, to bring them back not as a legend, but as a heroic part of history. He was known and respected in Ukraine by many people, and he was called the father of Zaporozhian Cossacks during his lifetime. And nowadays he is called the same way. Thanks to him, Zaporozhian Cossacks became the symbol of strength, freedom, and unbroken spirit of Ukrainians. Nowadays, the image of the Zaporozhian Cossack is a part of Ukrainian identity and a historical brand of Ukraine, which is well known all over the world. In our next episode, we are going to tell you how Dmytro Yavornitskiy collected cultural heritage and guarded it. We are going to tell you about him as an archaeologist, ethnographer, folklorist, and museum curator, and the fact that thanks to people like Dmytro Yavornitskiy, Ukrainian history exists till present day, despite all the bans, wars, and ruination. Stay tuned.